Have you ever noticed something strange? The world becomes deeply uncomfortable when a woman says she doesn't need a man to survive, not hate men, not avoid love, not reject relationships, just survive without one. And suddenly society starts asking questions. What's wrong with her? Why is she alone? Who hurt her? Because people can understand a woman being desired, but they struggle to understand a woman being complete by herself. That is the truth nobody talks about. A woman who lives alone without a man terrifies people for one reason: she becomes impossible to control emotionally. See, most people think loneliness destroys women, but sometimes solitude rebuilds them into something the world never prepared for. Because when a woman spends enough nights alone, paying her own bills, handling her own fears, eating alone, healing alone, crying alone, and still waking up stronger the next morning, something dangerous happens. She stops begging for validation. And the moment that happens, the entire dynamic changes. Most men are used to women who seek reassurance. Women who ask, "Am I enough? Do you still love me? Will you stay?" But a woman who has mastered B. Wenji alone asks different questions. Does your presence improve my peace? Do you bring emotional safety? Are you worth disrupting the life I built? That level of emotional independence shocks people, because society secretly trained women to fear solitude more than suffering. Think about it. How many women stay in toxic relationships just because they're afraid to sleep alone, afraid to eat dinner alone, afraid society will label them unwanted? But the woman who survives loneliness discovers a hidden truth. Being alone is painful for a season, but staying with the wrong person destroys your soul permanently. And once she understands that, she can never unlearn it. Now here's where it gets deeper. Women who live alone begin to see human behavior with terrifying clarity. Why? Because silence sharpens observation. When distractions disappear, patterns become obvious. She notices who only calls when they need something, who disappears when she stops chasing, who loved her attention more than her existence. And slowly, she stops performing for acceptance. That's the transformation nobody warns you about. A woman living alone eventually stops trying to be chosen. She starts choosing herself. Most people don't understand what truly happens when a woman learns how to survive alone. Not for a weekend, not after one breakup, not temporarily while waiting for someone new. I mean truly alone. No emotional safety net. No man constantly reassuring her. No one checking if she got home. No one carrying her emotionally through life. At first, it breaks her, because silence is brutal in the beginning. The nights feel longer. The bed feels colder. The apartment feels emptier. Every sound reminds her that nobody is coming. And that is the phase where most people expect her to collapse. But something strange happens when a woman keeps surviving nights that were supposed to destroy her. She adapts. Human beings adapt to pain faster than people realize. The same woman who once cried herself to sleep eventually starts enjoying the peace of her own company. That transformation is dangerous, because the world is built around emotional dependency. People are easier to manipulate when they fear being alone. That's why so many relationships survive without love. Fear keeps them alive. Fear of empty mornings. Fear of seeing other couples online. Fear of feeling unwanted. Fear of starting over. But when a woman survives loneliness long enough, fear loses its grip on her. And once fear disappears, control disappears with it. That is what shocks people, because suddenly she stops tolerating things she once begged to keep. The late replies that used to make her anxious, now she notices them once and emotionally detaches. The mixed signals that once confused her, now she reads them clearly. The bare minimum that once felt romantic, now it feels insulting. Why? Because solitude sharpens standards. A woman who spends enough time alone begins to understand her own value without needing someone else to announce it. And that changes the energy she carries. You can feel it instantly. She walks differently, speaks differently, chooses differently. Not louder, not arrogant, just harder to emotionally manipulate. That's the part many people secretly hate, because emotionally independent women force people to become genuine. You can no longer control her with attention. You can no longer impress her with empty words. You can no longer disappear and expect her to wait forever. She already learned how to continue life without someone beside her. And once a woman realizes she can survive without you, you lose the power of emotional intimidation. Most people never think about this deeply. A woman who fears loneliness will tolerate emotional starvation for years. But a woman who has already faced loneliness, already cried through it, already rebuilt herself through it, becomes very difficult to break psychologically, because now she knows something powerful. Absence does not kill her. And once someone learns that, they become free. Free from begging. Free from chasing. Free from shrinking themselves just to keep someone interested. This is why some men become uncomfortable around highly independent women. Not because those women are cruel, not because they hate men, but because emotionally secure women cannot be controlled through inconsistency. Hot and cold behavior stops working. Manipulation stops working. Silent treatment stops working. Why? Because peace became more important to her than validation. That sentence alone changes everything. See, most people are addicted to validation without realizing it. They need text to feel attractive, attention to feel valuable, relati, bow on ships to feel complete. But solitude teaches a woman a terrifying lesson. Nobody can permanently complete another human being. And once she understands that, she stops placing her entire identity inside relationships. Now listen carefully. This does not mean she stops wanting love. That's the lie people tell. Strong women still crave affection, still desire intimacy, still want partnership. But now love becomes a choice instead of a survival need. That difference changes the entire psychology of attraction, because desperation has an energy, and so does peace. People can feel when someone is terrified of losing them, but they can also feel when someone respects themselves enough to walk away. And nothing is more psychologically powerful than a woman who can leave peacefully. Not screaming, not begging, not threatening, just leaving, because she already built a life that exists beyond you. That level of emotional control terrifies immature people. Why? Because many relationships secretly survive through dependency, not compatibility. Some people don't stay because they are deeply loved. They stay because the other person fears abandonment too much to leave. Boo. Solitude destroys that fear slowly. And the more a woman heals alone, the less emotional chaos she tolerates. That's why women who live alone for years often become incredibly selective. People call them hard to please. No. They are simply no longer impressed by temporary attention. They've seen what loneliness feels like. And they've also seen what fake love feels like. And fake love is lonelier. That realization changes a woman permanently, because being ignored by someone sleeping beside you hurts deeper than sleeping alone peacefully. Being emotionally abandoned inside a relationship is one of the darkest forms of loneliness. And women who experience that enough times eventually stop romanticizing relationships. They stop asking, "Who wants me?" and start asking, "Who deserves access to me?" That shift is psychological evolution. Now her standards are no longer based on attraction alone. She watches behavior, consistency, emotional maturity, energy, because solitude taught her something relationships never could. Peace is fragile, and protecting peace becomes addictive after chaos. That's why some women disappear from dating completely for long periods. Not because nobody wants them, but because they finally discovered how beautiful calm feels. No arguments, no emotional games, no anxiety waiting for replies, no overthinking somebody's loyalty at 2 a.m., just peace. And once someone experiences peaceful solitude, they stop romanticizing emotional suffering. That's why emotionally unavailable people struggle with independent women, because these women are not impressed by potential anymore. Potential doesn't comfort them at night. Potential doesn't build trust. Potential doesn't create emotional safety. Consistency does. And if consistency disappears, so does their attachment. That level of emotional discipline is rare, especially in a world addicted to toxic attachment. Now here's the deeper truth nobody says out loud. A woman who masters solitude becomes emotionally dangerous in the healthiest way possible, because she no longer stays where she is disrespected. And people who benefited from her lack of boundaries will call this cold, but it's not coldness. It's self-respect finally waking up. See, the younger version of her tolerated confusion because she feared losing people. The healed version fears losing. G herself, that changes everything. Now she notices red flags immediately, energy shifts immediately, disrespect immediately. Not because she became paranoid, because silence trained her intuition. Solitude forces people to hear themselves clearly. And when a woman finally hears her own intuition without outside noise, she becomes almost impossible to deceive emotionally. That is why her presence feels different now. Calmer, sharper, untouchable in a strange way. Not because she became emotionless, but because she stopped allowing emotions to control her decisions. And honestly, that level of self-control is rare in modern relationships. Most people would rather stay attached to pain than face temporary loneliness. But a woman who conquered solitude already faced the thing everyone else is running from. And once someone survives their deepest fear, they become free in a way that cannot be explained. To people still trapped by it, loneliness changes a woman in ways the world never talks about honestly. Not the fake social media version of loneliness, not the aesthetic version with coffee shops, sunsets, and healing journeys, real loneliness. The kind where the phone stays silent for hours. The kind where nobody asks if she's okay. The kind where she sits in a dark room with her thoughts, realizing she has nobody to emotionally collapse into. That kind of loneliness either destroys a woman slowly or rebuilds her into someone almost unrecognizable. And the terrifying part is, most people don't notice the transformation until it's already complete, because pain changes people quietly. At first, loneliness attacks her confidence. She starts questioning herself. Why did people leave? Why do I feel forgotten? Am I difficult to love? Am I too much? Not enough? And those questions are dangerous. Because a lonely mind becomes vulnerable to accepting crumbs just to feel chosen again. That's why some women enter toxic relationships immediately after emotional isolation. Not because the relationship is healthy, but because attention temporarily numbs emptiness. Humans will accept emotional poison if they are starving long enough. And society knows this. That's why loneliness terrifies people. A lonely person becomes emotionally desperate, and desperate people settle for things that healed people would instantly reject. But sometimes, instead of running from loneliness, a woman sits inside it long enough to understand it. That's where transformation begins. Because after enough nights alone, the silence starts teaching her things. She begins noticing how much of her life was built around pleasing others, how much energy she wasted trying to keep people comfortable, how often she abandoned her intuition just to avoid losing someone. And slowly, she starts reconnecting with herself. Not the version designed for relationships, not the version designed for male approval, not the version designed for social acceptance, her real self, the self buried underneath years of performance. That process is painful, because healing is not beautiful in the beginning. Healing looks like crying unexpectedly, overthinking old memories at midnight, feeling emotionally exhausted for no reason, remembering every betrayal at once. People think healing feels peaceful. Healing often feels like psychological war before it becomes freedom, because loneliness forces a woman to face emotions she spent years distracting herself from. And most people avoid themselves their entire lives. That's why silence feels unbearably to so many humans. Silence exposes unresolved pain. But if she survives that stage, something incredible starts happening psychologically. She becomes emotionally observant. Her intuition sharpens, because when distractions disappear, patterns become visible. She notices how certain people only contact her when they need validation. She notices who disappears when she stops overgiving. She notices how often she confused emotional intensity with genuine love, and that awareness changes her permanently. Because once a woman sees patterns clearly, she cannot unsee them. That's why healed women often appear different after periods of isolation. Calmer, more selective, less reactive. Not because they stopped caring, because they finally learned where their energy deserves to go. Loneliness teaches women the difference between attention and connection. And those are not the same thing. A man can text her all day and still make her feel emotionally empty. A relationship can exist publicly while dying privately. And women who spend enough time alone eventually realize something heartbreaking. Some relationships are just organized loneliness. Two people sitting beside. each other while emotionally living on separate planets. That realization wakes something up inside her. Now she stops craving company for the sake of company. She starts craving peace. And peace changes standards completely, because a peaceful woman no longer finds chaos exciting. The emotional roller coasters that once felt addictive now feel exhausting. The inconsistency that once made her chase harder now makes her lose interest immediately. Why? Because loneliness taught her emotional exhaustion hurts more than physical solitude. And honestly, that lesson saves lives. So many women lose themselves trying to keep toxic love alive. They shrink themselves, silence their needs, ignore red flags, accept disrespect, all because they fear ending up alone. But once a woman already survives being alone, that fear weakens. And when fear weakens, self-respect grows. That's when her standards become powerful. Not unrealistic, not arrogant, powerful. Because now she no longer asks, how do I keep someone? Now she asks, does this connection protect or damage my peace? That question changes everything. Now relationships must compete with the calm she built alone. And calm is addictive after emotional suffering. Most people don't understand how much strength it takes for a woman to rebuild herself privately. Nobody sees the nights she almost texted someone toxic just to stop feeling lonely. Nobody sees the mornings she forced herself out of bed emotionally drained. Nobody sees the battles happening silently inside her mind. But those battles create resilience, real resilience, not motivational quote strength. The kind built through surviving days nobody clapped for. And the deeper the loneliness was, the deeper the transformation becomes. Because pain either hardens bitterness or deepens wisdom. Some women become cold after isolation. Others become incredibly emotionally intelligent.
Why?
Because suffering increases awareness when someone chooses growth instead of resentment. Now she understands human behavior differently. She can sense emotional immaturity faster, manipulation faster, insecurity faster. Because loneliness forced her to study emotions deeply, especially her own. That's why women who heal alone often intimidate emotionally shallow people. These women cannot be fooled by surface-level charm for long. Why? Because solitude trained them to value substance over stimulation. And that is rare in modern dating culture. Most people are addicted to excitement, attention, chemistry, temporary highs. But healed loneliness teaches a woman something more valuable than excitement: emotional safety. And once she experiences emotional peace, chaotic love loses its appeal. That's why some women completely disappear emotionally after healing. People think they became distant. They became intentional. Every person entering her life now gets evaluated differently. Does this person drain my energy, disturb my nervous system, create confusion, bring instability? If yes, she walks away faster than before. Not because she hates connection. Because loneliness taught her that protecting peace is survival. Now here comes the part most people are not ready to hear. Loneliness also leaves scars. Even strong women carry them. A woman who survives too much alone sometimes becomes hyper-independent. And hyper-independence looks powerful from the outside, but sometimes it's unresolved pain in disguise. Because when people repeatedly disappoint someone emotionally, the brain adapts. It stopped. Expecting support. Now she handles everything herself, pain herself, stress herself, breakdowns herself. And eventually vulnerability starts feeling unsafe. That's why some women struggle receiving genuine love after years alone. Not because they don't want love, because survival mode trained them not to depend on anyone. People praise strong women constantly without asking what created that strength. Sometimes strength is born from abandonment. Sometimes independence is born from disappointment. Sometimes silence created a warrior because nobody came when she needed softness. And that changes a person deeply. Now she trusts slowly, opens slowly, loves carefully. Because loneliness taught her how painful emotional betrayal becomes after attachment. But despite all of this, something extraordinary still emerges from women who survive isolation with self-awareness. Depth. Real depth, not surface confidence, not fake positivity. Depth created through pain, reflection, survival, and emotional evolution. And you can feel it immediately when they speak. There's calm in their voice, awareness in their eyes, control in their energy, because loneliness forced them to meet themselves completely. And people who truly meet themselves become different forever. They stop chasing noise, stop worshiping attention, stop abandoning themselves to avoid rejection. Because after surviving emotional darkness alone, they finally understand their own value without needing the world to constantly confirm it. Most people don't fall in love. They fall into fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of feeling unwanted in a world obsessed with validation. And because of that fear, people stay in relationships that slowly destroy them emotionally. They call it loyalty, call it commitment, call it fighting for love. But sometimes they are just terrified to let go. That's the truth nobody wants to admit. A lot of relationships are built on emotional dependency, not genuine connection. Two people holding on to each other, not because they are deeply fulfilled, but because they are both afraid of the emptiness waiting outside the relationship. And fear creates dangerous attachments. Because when someone fears loneliness more than disrespect, they begin tolerating things that slowly kill their self-worth. Ignored boundaries, half-love, emotional ink, onset, broken promises repeated so many times they start sounding normal. This is how people lose themselves. Not suddenly at all. Slowly. One compromise at a time. One ignored red flag at a time. One painful night at a time. Until one day they wake up emotionally exhausted, realizing they stayed loyal to someone while betraying themselves. That's why the strongest women are not women who never wanted love. The strongest women are the ones who discovered they could survive without it. That realization changes everything psychologically. Because the moment a woman understands she can survive alone, love stops being survival. It becomes choice. And real love can only exist when staying is a choice. Think about that deeply. If someone stays because they fear loneliness, is that truly love? If someone tolerates disrespect because they don't think they'll find anyone else, is that connection? That is emotional captivity disguised as romance. Real love begins when a woman no longer needs another person to complete her identity, because now she is no longer dating from desperation. She is dating from awareness, and awareness changes standards completely. Now she no longer asks, how do I make someone stay? Now she asks, does this relationship bring peace into my life or chaos? That single question eliminates most unhealthy relationships immediately. Because peaceful people stop romanticizing suffering, and society romanticizes suffering constantly. They tell women things like, love is sacrifice. Relationships are hard. Fight for your person. But nobody warns women about what happens when they fight so hard for others that they lose themselves completely. Some women spent years trying to save relationships that were draining their soul daily, trying harder, loving harder, forgiving harder, while the other person barely met them halfway emotionally, and eventually something inside them breaks. Not loudly, quietly. That's the moment a woman starts emotionally waking up. She realizes she was pouring oceans into people who only gave her drops back. And once she sees that clearly, she can never return to the old version of herself again. Now she understands something most people learn too late. Love without peace becomes emotional addiction. The highs feel intoxicating. The lows feel devastating. And the brain starts confusing emotional instability with pass. That's why toxic relationships feel so hard to leave, not because they are healthy, because inconsistency creates psychological attachment. One day affection, next day distance, one day attention, next day coldness. That unpredictability traps people emotionally. But women who learn how to live alone eventually break that addiction. Why? Because solitude resets their nervous system. For the first time in years, they experience calm. No emotional guessing games. No waiting anxiously for replies. No wondering if someone still cares. Just silence, stillness, peace. And at first, peace feels unfamiliar, almost boring, because chaos trained their nervous system to expect emotional turbulence constantly. But slowly, they begin understanding something profound. Peace is not boring. Peace is healthy. And once a woman experiences healthy peace after surviving toxic emotional cycles, her standards rise permanently. Now she cannot romanticize confusion anymore. If someone's words and actions don't match, she notices immediately. If someone only loves her when it's convenient, she notices immediately. If someone creates emotional instability, she feels it instantly, because healing sharp, we-N-S intuition. And healed women stop ignoring what their soul already knows. That's why emotionally mature women become selective. Not because they think they are better than everyone, because they finally understand how expensive emotional suffering becomes over time. Every toxic relationship steals something: confidence, peace, trust, energy, identity. And women who rebuilt themselves alone understand how painful it is to recover those things. So now they protect themselves differently. People call them guarded, but boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are wisdom earned through pain. Now here's the part that shocks people most. When a woman truly stops fearing loneliness, she becomes impossible to emotionally trap, because manipulation only works on people terrified of losing you. But what happens when she already accepted the possibility of losing people? What happens when she already survived heartbreak? What happens when she already rebuilt herself from emotional destruction? Suddenly threats lose power. Silent treatment loses power. Mixed signals lose power. Emotional withdrawal loses power, because she knows something now. No relationship is worth abandoning herself for. That level of self-respect changes the entire energy she carries. You can feel it when she enters a room. She no longer chases attention desperately, no longer competes for love, no longer performs constantly for approval. Because she discovered approval from the wrong people never heals emptiness anyway. That's why women who heal alone often become calmer, less reactive, less dramatic, less emotionally chaotic. Not because they stopped feeling emotions, because they stopped letting emotions control their standards. That is emotional maturity. And most people never reach it. Most people spend their entire lives choosing temporary comfort over real peace. They stay where they feel wanted temporarily instead of where they feel emotionally safe consistently. But healed women stop confusing those two things. Attention is not love. Chemistry is not compatibility. Attachment is not connection. And once she understands that deeply, dating changes forever. Now she watches consistency more than words, effort more than promises, behavior more than potential, because potential means nothing without action. And women who survived emotional disappointment enough times stop falling in love with someone could become, they start focusing on who someone already is. That protects them from emotional fantasy. Now relationships become intentional instead of addictive. And honestly, that kind of love is rare, because mature love feels different than toxic love. Toxic love feels urgent, possessive, chaotic, emotionally overwhelming. Mature love feels calm, safe, consistent, peaceful. And people addicted to chaos often mistake peaceful love for lack of passion, because their nervous system became addicted to emotional instability. But healed women eventually recognize the difference. They realize butterflies are not always intuition. Sometimes butterflies are anxiety. Sometimes chemistry is just emotional unpredictability activating old wounds. That realization changes everything psychologically. Now she no longer wants someone who simply excites her emotionally. She wants someone emotionally safe enough for her nervous system to rest around. That is a completely different kind of connection. And once a woman experiences that level of emotional peace, she can never go back to begging for half love again, because she finally understands the most important truth of all. NG alone may feel painful sometimes, but staying in relationships that slowly destroy your spirit hurts far worse. And once a woman truly learns how to survive without